All right, this is that moment of truth where I wait for this stuff to be on the internet. And, there's always a lull. So let's wait for it to happen. All right, YouTube, it looks like you're waking up. Looks like, YouTube is awake. What's up, YouTube? How's Rockfin? What's going on, Rockfin? Are you Rockfin is awake too? It was almost simultaneous. They almost woke up at exactly the same time. How about that? What's up, everybody? Good afternoon to everyone in an afternoon time zone. Good morning to all my fellow West Coasters. My guest today is a fellow West Coaster like myself. Hope your morning coffee was spectacular. Good evening if you're in an evening time zone. And to everyone in the future, what's up? How is your future? New Zealand, Australia, you're a day ahead of us. Please solve climate change. You have a day of future knowledge. Shout out to everyone who makes this show possible. Our friends over at ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules, and you can get their tea wholesale now because of the pandemic. Show them some love and look out for Iran tea. It is coming soon. Also, our friends over at triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Trendy name makes topical pain oil for your body. It works wonders. I use it myself. And our friends over at Indie Left. Indie Left is the only place to find all the articles and streamers and content creators you know and love. They curate a big old list for you. They update it twice a day. I'm there along with all the other content creators you know and love to get hip to them and to subscribe to their Discord community. They're dancing on the Discord. Check them out at independentleft.media. That is independentleft.media. And by the way, yours truly wrote their theme song. And if you want your own theme song, patreon.com/romplacone. Go ahead and join my Patreon for a give what you can level. There are no tiers. It is a give what you can level. And one of the perks is I will make you your own theme song if you want one. All right. Without further ado. So we've been talking about, or this has been brought up rather, the infrastructure bill that Joe Biden is proposing. We've talked about it pretty extensively yesterday. And the overall nuts and bolts, 2-word summary, not enough. Not enough. But there's a portion in there that is particular to broadband, that addresses broadband specifically, that leaves a lot of us cautiously optimistic. Don't go celebrating in the streets yet, folks. Be cautious because there's still a lot of ambiguity here. But we're going to go through the nuts and bolts of it. And here to help me through this process is a regular on this show, one of my favorite people in the electoral realm, but he is so much more than that. He is a digital rights activist himself. He has been active in the EFF for many years, and he has run against Nancy Pelosi, and I think he might be doing it again. We're going to talk more in depthly about that later in the hour, but please welcome back to the show, Mr. Shahid Buttar. What's up, Shahid?
Great to be with you, Ron. Thanks for having me, brother.
Dude, always good to see you, and I think the last time you were at one of our final in-person events when live performance was still a thing that happened in humanity.
I remember, in fact, you gave me my comedy debut. My at this point, the only time I have ever done a comedy routine was at your show, Ron. So I appreciate you giving me the chance to try something new.
That was a fun night, and who knew that was the last time we'd be doing anything like that for a while.
If the pandemic hadn't happened, I might have become a comedian by now.
Well, it's not too late. It's not too late, buddy. There's going to be the post-pandemic world. I'm hoping come fall live performance is back, but we'll see. Fingers crossed, right? But so let's jump into the broadband portion of the infrastructure bill first. There have been a few things that have surfaced, a few articles and analysis that have been done. We're going to go right to the fact sheet from whitehouse.gov. But first, I want to turn it over to you. Do you agree with my assessment? Cautiously optimistic? Is that a fair place to be right now?
Yeah. I mean, so the plan that Biden announced was, frankly, astoundingly progressive relative to his conservative history. And I would say that it nods particularly to proposals that both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had backed. And it's interesting to see the influence of some of the furthest, not this about Warren, but Bernie, certainly, the furthest left campaign of the 2020 presidential primary, informing the Biden administration. I'm frankly surprised pleasantly to see that. Reasons to be cautious about our optimism include Senate Republicans who stand in the way of this proposal, and the likelihood that the proposal as it was announced will be watered down and and shift between now and the time that it might actually ultimately hit the street. And there's a lot of room for compromise and prevarication. And while the biggest thing here is that $100 billion is no small amount of money to sink into rural broadband, and particularly to shift away from market-based delivery options towards public investment in, for instance, municipal infrastructure. That's a big deal. It's way to the left.
Now that verbiage really surprised me pleasantly. I was really surprised to see that, and I think you're absolutely right. Where it's like, well, this kind of sounds like Bernie Sanders' high-speed internet for all bill. Now the difference is, and you kind of hinted at this too, for that cautiously optimistic part. Gee, when Bernie Sanders proposes a bill like that, he probably really wants to get it done.
Right.
Can we trust that this verbiage will be delivered from the guy who launched his campaign at a dinner with Comcast executives? Proceed with caution.
And moreover, not only is it the case that Biden might be less committed to these goals than Bernie, the difference between them ultimately is that, one, Bernie is a change agent who has been dedicated to his principles for decades and shown it at every opportunity, whereas Biden seems to be a sort of prevaricator in chief. And it's not just the case that he might not be as committed to the goals as we would hope. It's also the case that he doesn't have the same juice. He doesn't have the same style. He doesn't necessarily use the bully pulpit in the way that Bernie would be, or the way that his predecessors have. And it's not clear to me that this administration has the tools that it needs to effectively move its legislative agenda through Congress. Now, the one thing I want to sort of make clear here is that I would love to see the broadband provisions of the infrastructure bill become law. Many other provisions of the infrastructure investment that Biden has proposed are worth pursuing. The challenge here is both the chance and likelihood that many of its best elements will be watered down, and particularly the areas of omission. The things that did not make it into the infrastructure bill are as telling as the things that did. And I'm like you, I'm very pleasantly surprised that the $100 billion to promote alternatives to market delivery of internet services, that it made it into the bill. It's way out of character for him, and I'm as eager as anyone else to see the path for this proposal going forward.
Totally. And so let's go specifically to the fact sheet itself to just kind of like illuminate what we're talking about here. So here's the fact sheet straight from the White House website. Now, again, actions speak louder than word, folks. So we're saying proceed with caution. But here's what they're talking about. Generations ago, the federal government recognized that without affordable access to electricity, Americans couldn't fully participate in modern society. So they're drawing that comparison to electricity, where it once started as something that only elites had, and then slowly but surely, and then all of a sudden, it became something for everyone. They're saying that broadband internet is the new electricity. It is necessary for Americans to do their job, to participate equally in school learning, healthcare, and to stay connected. So, and then they're saying, but yet still there is a digital divide in this country, what there is. So here's what they're proposing in the infrastructure package. Build high-speed broadband infrastructure to reach 100% coverage. The president's plan prioritizes building future-proof broadband infrastructure in unserved and underserved areas. It also, now here was the big surprise, and this is what Shahid hinted at earlier and what I've talked about earlier. It also prioritizes support for broadband networks owned, operated by, or affiliated with local governments, nonprofits, and cooperatives, providers with less pressure to turn profits and with a commitment to serving entire communities. In short, it prioritizes municipal broadband. So they're claiming promote transparency and competition. President Biden's plan will promote price transparency and competition among internet providers, including by lifting barriers that prevent municipally owned or affiliated providers and rural electric co-ops from competing. There are still 22 states that have barriers to municipal broadband. These are laws that were put in place by big cable to make sure that a city never competed with them so that they could maintain their monopoly and have crappy infrastructure, but price gouge it so they can make as much money as possible. And reduce the cost of broadband internet service, promote more widespread adoption. So President Biden believes that building out broadband infrastructure isn't enough. I don't know if he personally believes that. I have a feeling he's clueless, but okay. We also must ensure that every American who wants to afford high quality and reliable broadband internet can. Okay. So, and they're talking subsidies and making internet more affordable. So that's the nuts and bolts of what is going on here. And again, actions speak louder than words. But if enacted, this would be a huge step forward. However, one thing to maintain caution about is the vague language in there. I mean, they're saying it'll prioritize this. It'll also give, but what does that mean exactly?
Right.
What does that mean when push comes to shove? When push comes to shove, are you really not going to give these big cable companies what they want? Because here's an article that came out recently. Apparently, big cable has already responded to this. And even though it's just kind of vague verbiage right now, surprising vague verbiage, but vague verbiage nonetheless, the big cable companies already aren't happy. Now, check out this article. Cable lobby says it hates Biden plan to expand broadband and lower prices. Great headline and accurate, but here's the deal. I had to do a double take because check out the date, April 1st, 2021. So you kind of wondered if it's no, actually, he told the cable lobby he'd give them whatever they want. But no, this is a for real article. Industry says U.S. should favor private ISPs and take no action to lower prices. Not an Onion headline, not an April Fool's prank. This is actually real. They are just accurately reporting here. The cable lobby hates Biden's plan, which potentially would expand broadband and lower prices. So basically what they're saying is it's a serious wrong turn. The White House has elected to go big on broadband infrastructure, but it risks taking a serious wrong turn in discarding decades of successful policy by suggesting that the government is better suited than private sector technologists to build and operate the internet. What are these decades of successful policy they're referring to? What successful policy we've had because of organizations like what you've been affiliated with, the EFF, organizations like Free Press, like Fight for the Future, like the Hispanic Media Coalition, all these digital rights organizations. There are about 70 throughout the United States. What good policy we have and what good policy we've been able to hang on to and what bad policy we fought against, we have organizations like that to thank, not AT&T and Comcast and Verizon. We have seen some progress despite them, not because of them. All they've done is try to gut net neutrality.
Absolutely. And when we think about these decades of supposed success, it's really interesting to observe where the United States started when the internet era began and how it's turned out. So we led the development of the internet. And at the moment, we're not even in the top 15 countries in terms of broadband access. About 10% of the American public can't access broadband services, even if they have the money to pay for it. Like the service is just not there. And the number of people who can't afford broadband internet at current monopoly rates hasn't even been quantified. When you were talking about the wiggle room in the vague language in the Biden proposal, the place where I'm most concerned is this nod to lowering prices, because so much of the plan is about expanding access. How much the prices will come down ultimately is a distributive question. And this is not an area where Biden, frankly, has inspired confidence in the past. It's not only the case that we have decades of demonstrable failure by the market provision of ISPs. The part here that I'm most surprised by, and you sort of alluded to this when we were talking about the emphasis on municipal broadband, it is in a very real way a frankly quite visionary proposal in the sense of establishing a beachhead for a socialized vision of how Americans get to the internet. When you were talking about the state laws passed to preclude municipal fiber and entrench the monopoly position of the private internet service providers like AT&T, like Comcast and Verizon, those measures represent almost like the apex of predatory capitalism, where you have commercial entities, corporations, lobbying for laws that undermine consumers, undermine the public interest in access to broadband internet, undermine the macro economy in the service of entrenching their own monopoly positions, and to support from the federal government publicly owned internet infrastructure. That is absolutely huge. Publicly owned anything is a big deal at a moment like this, when so many forces are pushing us towards austerity and privatization. And so in many ways, that particular provision of the Biden infrastructure proposal, I think of as frankly, surprisingly visionary, not just better than the private market alternatives, but he's really in this portion of his proposal, he's frankly taking a page out of Bernie's book, and I'm glad to see it. I would rather it be Bernie taking a page out of his own book, of course, because then we could rely on the commitments of the authors. But for a president this conservative, Biden is the most conservative Democratic president since Harry Truman, and for
isn't that remarkable? Isn't it remarkable how as a society, we are progressing socially, yet in electoralism, we're going the opposite direction. It's just, and nobody seems to care. Well, I mean, people do. The people watching right now, and people like you, but the collective we, but they're just like, well, just pick the lesser evil, we'll be fine. Like, no, don't you see where that's getting us?
I saw this happen about 13 years ago when Obama came to Washington. The same thing happened where many centrist liberals decided that their concerns that they established under the Bush administration simply no longer applied, even though it was a Democratic president who went on to continue, and in fact, in many areas, from deportations to surveillance, doubled down on those failures of the preceding regime. Similarly, now I think a lot of people came to an awareness that Donald Trump was a threat to the republic, and so many people settle for the relief that it's not him in the White House anymore, not realizing that Joe Biden is the closest person in the Democratic Party to Donald Trump ideologically. And it's one reason why I'm surprised by the infrastructure proposal, because it's profoundly out of character for Biden. It seems to me, if I can expand the context just for a second, before when you were talking about how, the bad bills that we stopped that would undermine internet freedom and the positive aspects that we've been able to preserve, you were suggesting that the sphere of internet public interest organizations are responsible for it. And I certainly value those groups, including EFF and Fight for the Future and Free Press and all the others, Media Justice, I should shout out, having served on the board at one point. But I really give credit to users. Each of those organizations relies on the base in the same way that in electoral politics, we rely on the voters. And I'm very disinclined to credit institutional actors for progress that ultimately the people are responsible for. And I have a great deal of confidence that the concession to Bernie's vision that we see in Biden's proposal is also a concession ultimately to we the people of the United States and users of the internet who wouldn't frankly settle for more of the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're 100% right. I mean, keep in mind, and yeah, these organizations, I applaud the work they do, and they are infinitely important. But, at the end of the day, it was not just organizations, but also we the people who crashed the FCC's website demanding that they instate net neutrality when we got it on the books in 2015. It was we the people that did that. So yeah, you're absolutely 100% right. And, we keep referencing Bernie's high-speed internet for all bill, which was a fantastic bill. And one of those things like, yes, let's see this become law. One of the things that bill did was that bill was built upon the study that the Institute of Local Self-Reliance did along with Harvard University that showed us that, when we have municipal broadband networks, they are better and cheaper than big cable 99.9% of the time. And the only time they're not better is when we measured them before they were finished. That's the only time. The only reason I can't say 100% is, and they even give that disclaimer in the study. They're like, so a few times the speeds were just as good and not better. And that's only because this project wasn't finished. It was still cheaper, by the way, but it wasn't necessarily better, but it also wasn't finished. So when it's finished, it's probably going to be better. So pretty much 100%. I mean, more like 100% of the time. That's why when you hear the cliched argument of like, well, do we really want to turn it over to the public? Do we really want it to be run by our city or our municipality? It's like, first of all, it's really a bummer you hate your own neighborhood that much. Maybe you should just move. If you hate your own, do you hate it when they pick up your trash? Would you rather they not do that? You really hate utilities in your neighborhood that much? That's an interesting way to live a life. Second of all, there's 100% track record of them beating out big cable 100% of the time. And they're doing it in major cities, i.e. Chattanooga, Tennessee. And they're even doing it in towns of about 7,000 people, i.e. Charlemont, Massachusetts. So it can be done in pretty much any town or municipality, no matter the size.
That's huge in terms of the extending internet access to rural areas that have previously been underserved. Another piece here, when you're talking about the speed tests being comparable and better in the case of municipal fiber, that's in the current time slice. Where I see the real benefit accruing is in the future, because fiber scales. This is infrastructure that is resilient to obsolescence in a way that copper wire infrastructure is not. So the legacy private corporate funded internet infrastructure, one reason we've fallen to the 20th in the world. Last time I checked, we were at 16th, but this was a couple of years ago. But one reason we've been falling in terms of the world leaders with broadband access is because our infrastructure, the wires over which the signal travels, is capped. It can't expand as the bandwidth and traffic over the network expand. However, fiber can. And that future scalability, I think of as even more crucial, frankly, than the current time slice speed test comparisons, in which municipal fiber also outperforms the supposedly decades of success that the industry is referring to, in its pushback. But you shared that article from the industry critiquing Biden's bill, and I love that you highlighted the date, because it does look like a big April Fool's joke, because you kind of would have to be a fool to buy anything that they said in that article.
Right. Well, and the author of that piece, he does some pretty good digital rights coverage. Let me make sure I get his name right here. John Brodkin. He writes for Ars Technica, and he covers a lot of the digital rights space. And he does. I got to look into having him on the show sometime, because he does a good job with it. But yeah, I mean, you see that headline and you just kind of, there had to have been a little bit of a tongue in cheek, like he got a little bit of a chuckle where it's like, they're saying that we're fine the way we are. We shouldn't lower prices. Just let us keep doing our thing. Let you keep doing your thing. What is your thing? We have an organized duopoly where we don't infringe on each other's territory. It's not totally cut and dry, because then people would catch on. But for the most part, there's AT&T land, there's Comcast land, there's Cox land, there's Spectrum land, and we don't really infringe on each other. And then we don't really give a hoot about the infrastructure itself. And then we just raise prices constantly. Oh, and we impose these data caps that are totally unnecessary. They do absolutely nothing. The pandemic proved that. There's no reason for them to exist ever. But it allows us to price gauge more. And and sometimes we don't even really hire employees. We just get contractors out there to have your service, because we really, really don't care, and we don't want anyone to care. Quite frankly, we should keep doing that. Yeah, otherwise it'll be chaos. Otherwise, you won't have internet.
It's exactly what we should expect corporate representatives to say. And another piece here that you're biting off when you talk about the local monopolies, one policy area that has informed and led to this erosion of our capacity to deliver internet services to people is antitrust law. So at the same time that the FCC has, for much of the preceding era, basically abdicated the need to regulate broadband, at the same time as that has happened, the FTC, that's the Federal Trade Commission, and DOJ, the Department of Justice, have more or less abandoned antitrust enforcement for the last generation. I was invited to work for the Justice Department's antitrust division in 2001, and the professor who I studied antitrust law with advised me, and he was absolutely right, that it would be a complete waste of time because enforcement simply stopped. And I've written at some length about any number of ways that both at the agency layer and in Congress that we can strengthen antitrust law to make it not just more responsive to addressing local monopolies of the sort that the ISPs are leveraging to undermine user access and drive up the price and gouge consumers, as you noted, but also other arenas of both in tech and well beyond it, where monopolies undermine the public interest. Examples that come to mind include Facebook acquiring Instagram. And it's really exciting. Another area where Biden has frankly surprised me has included his nomination of Lina Khan to the FTC. She's a legal academic, one of the leading lights in antitrust enforcement. She's written papers about how to rein in Facebook in particular using antitrust regulation. And one of the things that she particularly talks about is this idea of recognizing harms to consumers beyond price. In other words, if a service is free, like Facebook, traditional antitrust analysis would basically just ignore any consumer predation that might be happening, because under traditional antitrust analysis, you're not paying for it anyway, so how are you harmed? And Lena makes clear that people can be harmed in lots of ways beyond price gouging when technology platforms arbitrarily change their terms of service to subject their customers or products to more surveillance, for instance. That's an example of a consumer harm. Local monopolies are an obvious one. And I just wanted to point out here how antitrust and the abdication of antitrust responsibility is part of the explanation for how we found our way into this dark alley that we're now trying to escape from.
Well, you're a good man for not taking that gig. I mean, I would have at least been tempted if I were you. So you're going to do some antitrust stuff for us. Oh, cool. What are my responsibilities? Well, you don't actually do anything. You don't enforce anything. So really, your responsibilities are just, do you like to read? Because you're going to be doing a lot of that. Just show up here 40 hours a week and read a book. Okay.
The story of trust agencies since the 90s, frankly. I mean, even before that. And I should be clear here. Antitrust law, I talk about this a lot because I'm very committed to its principles, which include fairness as well as guarding competition. Like, many people think of antitrust law as competition regulation, and it is, but it has a huge component of consumer protection, because the point of it is to prevent the public from being preyed upon by people seeking profit, or better yet, legal fictions, corporations seeking profit. And when we look at the history, as opposed to where we are now, antitrust law includes some of the most, frankly, visionary components of our legal tradition, and they are out of favor now. But judges at one point imported into antitrust law, frankly, normative socialism, in the sense the essential facilities doctrine is the piece I'm referring to here. And it was developed in cases originally addressing, for instance, the right of competitors to access bridges across the Mississippi that were previously owned and operated and controlled, limited by a single corporation. And courts have intervened in multiple cases, breaking up AT&T, with respect to booksellers, and early in the internet. Courts have intervened in multiple cases to ensure that private companies share with their competitors certain facilities that are deemed essential. Over the last year, workers who have been deemed essential have been basically forced to work and put themselves and their health and the health of their families at risk in order to put food on their own table. That's what essential workers have meant. Essential facilities in the past led to, frankly, quite redistributive judicial decisions, and that doctrine has fallen on the floor in the last generation. But it indicates that in our own history, our own relatively conservative legal history in the United States, federal judges have recognized and taken action on this abdication of competition regulation and consumer protection. And I would like, frankly, to dial it back up. The essential facilities doctrine is, frankly, I think, the key to a great many things, because it would, if revived and expanded, help block and dismantle any number of places where dominant actors have seized a competitive arena to take advantage of the people who are subject to it. And that's not just true in the context of broadband. It's true in everything from pharmaceuticals. Every industry, frankly, has some problem that emerges here. Technology is the one that many people think about. And when I think about technology in this arena, it's not just the internet service delivery, it's also the tech platforms that are increasingly acting as gateways. And that presents its own set of antitrust problems that I do hope the administration's appointees to the FTC and folks at DOJ do a better job than their predecessors of dealing with.
So to put a period on just the broadband portion itself, to try to just make a prediction, do you think we might win this one? And then kind of follow up question on that. Do you think $100 billion, because that is sizable, in broadband development, because, it's not, I mean, it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but it's not the most expensive either, really. Do you think that's enough?
So my answer is that A and B will kind of conflate, in that I think we will get something. I don't think we'll get the full $100 billion that Biden has proposed.
Okay.
And so even if we did, I don't think it is enough, especially when, just to compare it, we're talking about $100 billion to extend broadband access to every American. We've wasted $2.2 trillion on a fighter plane that does not fly and has no strategic rationale. So the idea that we are willing to spend so much more on completely useless objects of corporate welfare. This is basically a Lockheed Martin support program. To be spending that much more on unnecessary things relative to, in the context of broadband infrastructure, it's hard to imagine a public investment that would pay off more. When we talk about giving people access to information, the ability to participate in commerce, to develop their own online projects, to access job opportunities, this is one of the most highly leveraged opportunities for economic stimulus one could imagine. And we waste far more money on programs that have far less to contribute to the economy and far less opportunities to spread around. And so 100 billion, I wouldn't describe it as a drop in the bucket. It is a lot of money. And frankly, it represents a pittance relative to the far greater sums that we squander on completely unproductive, useless, demonstrably harmful investments. And if we're going to be evaluating where we should focus on particular spending priorities, I would really like to see us spend a little bit. Frankly, I would like to see us spend a lot less on security, namely the Pentagon, in order to reinvest in other things. This is a very close analog to the demands we've heard across the country to reinvest in our communities by rationalizing spending on police departments. When we say defund the police, the point of that is to reinvest in social workers. Similarly, we're talking about reinvesting in broadband. Well, we could do a lot more of that if we stopped squandering so many of our civilization's resources on war and destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, I kind of, again, it is a sizable amount of money. I echo your concerns that it is not quite enough, which is pretty much the theme of the entire package. Like, okay, there's some good things in here, but it's not quite enough. But still, again, overall, the broadband portion was surprising in a good way in its verbiage. But let's all be cautiously optimistic because we're not dealing with an administration with the best track record. And by the best track record, I mean an abysmal one. And but we'll see what happens here. So let's switch gears, buddy. What is new? Well, first of all, are you going to be running again against Nancy Pelosi?
I might. I'll leave it.
Oh, you're not. Oh man, here I was hoping we'd have a bombshell for everybody.
Well, I'll give it to you straight. I'm eager to. Because
Okay.
I'm supported by a party, I'm not really in a position to just relaunch. I have to do a few things to put myself in a position to do it. So
Sure.
I'm working on it. I would like to. I hope to. And I expect to. We're getting a lot of support from around the country and across San Francisco. And seeing Nancy Pelosi escape accountability by ducking a debate for the 30th year and going back to Washington because voters didn't understand her record or the alternative is frankly, I'd be abandoning the movement if I didn't. And I particularly see the need not only to give San Francisco a voice aligned with our city's proudly visionary principles in Washington, but I also see this as a necessary step to defend the integrity of our election system. There are a lot of people, and mostly Democrats at the moment, talking about voting rights and the right-wing attack on voting rights, not just in Washington at the hands of Republicans in Congress, but around the country at the hands of Republicans in state legislatures. And it's a real concern. It is a frontal assault on our democracy, and the concerns that Democrats have raised about it overlook the attack on the side door of our democracy by Democratic incumbents who do things like refusing to debate opponents. And that is
they do a lot more than that. I mean, the DNC antics, we'll be talking for the next 5 hours if we get into the antics that DNC does. But
so when you ask me if I'm running again, that's what I'm thinking about, because the question is our election system sufficiently legitimate that a challenger can break through? And when the press doesn't cover campaigns or smears them or doesn't hold incumbents accountable, the question becomes, is the engine of our democracy broken? And I don't frankly know the answer to that. It seems to be. And you fix a broken system by participating in it. That also is an open question. I don't frankly know how to fix this particular system without participating in it, which sort of is why I'm in it in the first place, right? And so it's a straightforward question that you asked that unfortunately has a complicated answer. And
oh no, totally, man. I just wasn't sure if you were going to give me a soundbite. Like I wasn't sure if it was going to be like, you know what, I'm doing it, or like, no, I'm not going to do it. Here's what I'm doing instead. I mean, hey, we've talked about this before, and I'm not going to, no pressure. I'm not going to like harp on this, but Mayor Shahid has a nice ring to it. City council member Shahid has a nice ring to it. If you want to stay in electoralism, which of course you don't have to because you've done all kinds of stuff. You don't need to stay in electoralism if you don't want to. But
well, you kind of just to finish that, I'm not an electoralist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a candidate because I have been a direct action organizer, a policy advocate, a community organizer, an impact litigator. It's because all of those things that I have done have sort of led me to the top of each of those respective mountains, and then witnessing the unwillingness of our elected leaders to show up for work is what forced me into electoral politics. So I come to electoralism not as a last resort, but I've pulled all the other levers and I see where the machine is broken. So I came to that arena particularly to fix a problem, not because I aspire to a political career. And the particular problems I see specifically include three-letter agencies that as a mayor or a city council person, I would have absolutely no opportunity to address. And the last thing I'm interested in is moving backward. And if getting elected to a city council or a school board, if it takes me off the board as an agent of accountability for CIA torture and human rights abuses, I frankly don't think I'm doing anyone any favors. I would sooner go back to the nonprofit arena and continue my work holding the intelligence and security agencies accountable before sort of abandoning that project altogether in order to become a wholesale electoralist. Does that make sense?
No, that does make perfect sense. And I totally see where you're coming from there. The other side of it is, as you pointed out, the electoralism element is completely broken, which I agree with you 110%. So to really fix that, you do need to, I think, completely change the system. And how will something like that happen? Well, something like that will happen from the ground up. Would a city council member Shahid be able to go after these three-letter agencies, as you put it? Not as directly, no, but there's all kinds of microaggressions that go on right in San Francisco that a council member Shahid would be able to do a lot about. And, that sort of thing does eventually, hopefully, translate into federal policy. So, but I totally get your point. I mean, I take your point 110%.
And I take yours too. And just to, back it up a little bit, local offices are the most important in our democracy. The smaller the jurisdictional unit, the more influence the individual in the office frankly has. And I've seen, here in San Francisco, a member of our board of supervisors who represents the area where I live, Dean Preston, has been incredibly effective at promoting, for instance, tenants' rights. He helped, as a nonprofit lawyer, engineer the first proposal to provide representation paid for by the city to people facing eviction, basically public defenders for tenants. And that's an incredibly huge proposal, vision. It established a beachhead in San Francisco. It moved to New York. It should be national policy, but it isn't. And if I have the opportunity to serve in Congress, I'd be very eager to take that proposal in Congress. And I'm just pointing out here where it came from. It came from city council people, a member of our board of supervisors, local politicians, and public servants doing the hard work of representing their communities every day. And I don't mean in any way to diminish its importance. It's just not where, my focus has been much more on Washington over the last 20 years than it has been on San Francisco.
I got you. Let me ask you this. So Nancy Pelosi has said that she will not be seeking the speakership again. Do you think there's a chance she's just going to call it a day?
No, and here's why. Well, because there's two different ways this could break. If she were to call it a day, as you say, and retire, that would be great. I would love for that to happen.
Yeah.
One reason I don't think it will happen is that she, even after passing the gavel to likely Hakeem Jeffries in the next congressional session, she could still remain the spigot for corporate money across the Democratic Party. She could retain all of the influence she has had as the speaker without any of the accountability, which, when you were describing the sort of one perspective from which me taking the Justice Department job 20 years ago might have been attractive. Yeah, it's great work if you can get it to get paid for doing nothing. And she very well could retain her influence without any of the accountability from the standpoint of a career incumbent. That's great work if you can get it. The other reason I think it's unlikely that she will, as you put it, call it a day, is that even if she wants to retire, the LA Times recently reported the open ambition of the Pelosi's to put her daughter, Christine, in the seat.
So what if you run against her daughter?
Well, that likely might happen. I mean, that's you were forecasting precisely what I think is the most likely scenario. Other scenarios could emerge, but one reason that's particularly compelling is that Nancy Pelosi, as a 30-year incumbent, has engaged in all kinds of democracy suppressing measures, like, for instance, ducking debates for 30 years. I don't think her daughter can get away with that. And if anybody has to debate me, I have absolute confidence that I'll be in Congress because my platform very clearly matches the preferences of our district. The only reason I'm not in Congress now is because most voters didn't know the choices before us. They didn't know the incumbent's record. She relied on corporate propaganda. And my favorite part here is when you see Pelosi's response to the rare, thoughtful question that she gets from a reporter, it's positively Trumpian. Do you remember, I think it was Wolf Blitzer who asked her.
Oh, yeah, her meltdown. Wolf Blitzer. How bad do you have to be where I find myself rooting for Wolf freaking Blitzer? Nancy Pelosi level bad, apparently. Yeah, we feed them. I mean, there really is like we're the peasants. We're the plebs.
Yeah.
And she's the queen. And of course she wants her daughter to run. Of course she wants to give it over to her daughter. That's how the royal line works. And we're supposed to just take this.
And I find this particularly interesting. So I immigrated to the US from the UK, which is a constitutional monarchy. I live now in San Francisco, had the chance to win more votes against Nancy Pelosi, the closest thing we have to a queen in American politics. Won more votes against her than anyone in her 30-year career. I am eager to finish the job, particularly because if there's anything that offends me more than the corporate co-optation of one of America's most progressive cities by plutocracy and oligarchy, if there's anything that offends me more, it is nepotism and effective monarchy. We have an anti-nobility clause written in our Constitution. We repudiated inherited office in the document that established our country, and Nancy Pelosi wants effectively to work around it by placing her daughter in the seat. So all that's just, it's a long-winded way of responding to your question of, do I think that Pelosi is going to pack it in? Whether it's her or her daughter, the dynasty that created Nancy Pelosi, the dynasty that created Gavin Newsom, the dynasty that who is part of her family, that dynasty is what I am ultimately running against. And the notion of dynasty in the abstract is profoundly un-American. I think any American should frankly be offended at the idea that Nancy Pelosi has this openly monarchical aspiration. We have no place in American politics, in a democracy, for dynasties, whether that's the Bushes or the Clintons or the Pelosis or the Kennedys. We are committed to government for, of, and by the people, and nothing violates that more clearly than inherited political office and privilege.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you 110%. I mean, sometimes you just think like, well, doesn't she have enough? I mean, 2 ice cream freezers and $100 million. Like maybe she'll just pack it in. But no, I think you're right. I don't think she's going to. I just dare to dream. Well, what else is
if you come up with any good jokes about dynastic succession and a proud democracy, please share them with me, because I'll be very eager to build my comedy repertoire.
I will send them your way, man. Well. So what else in the meantime is on the agenda for Shahid Buttar? What other projects do you got on the horizon? I've gotten out of the habit of just referring to saying in the pipeline about anything, because fuck pipelines. So on the horizon is how I like to put it.
2 things on the horizon that I'm actively moving toward, trying to find alternatives to a pipeline analogy here. I'm sprinting to the horizon, both in writing a book about the last 20 years and the rise of bipartisan authoritarianism that has prompted and animated not just my advocacy and my art, but also my political campaigns. And I'm also working on an album. The track I've been working on the last couple of weeks that I'm most excited about is basically a history of the CIA put to a tech house track. And yeah, I'm looking super forward to getting each of those out. I started as an artist many years ago, well before I went to law school, basically as a documentary poet. That's kind of how I think of my spoken word. And then when I took up DJing, I started putting my poems to music. And some of the songs I put out include Ferguson to Jerusalem, and it refers to the pattern of predatory paramilitary policing. Long before, I put this out in 2017, and I wrote it, I think in 2014 or 15, inspired by the murders of Mike Brown and Eric Garner, many years before the more recent murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, to which we continue to respond. And nothing pains me more than to need to continue performing songs that I wish addressed issues that we put to bed. And our failure to address those issues is precisely why, as an artist, I felt compelled to pursue advocacy and then electoral politics. Last thing I'll just say here on the album is as a candidate, there's a certain vernacular that I have the opportunity to speak in and use. And as an artist, there are other vernaculars that I have a chance to use. And so I'm excited to step back into my old self and represent the entirety of my perspective, beyond just the limited issues that come before me politically. So yeah, between the book and the album, those are two projects that I'm very excited about bringing to fruition later this year.
Where can people learn more about all of the above, Shahid?
You can check us out online, our campaign site where folks can support our 2022 relaunch is shahidforchange.us. And folks can find me online on YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Clubhouse at Shahid for Change.
At Shahid for Change. And what if you just what if you run again? What if you challenge Nancy Pelosi to a slam poetry contest and do a debate in that form?
Rap battle, any particular format she wants to pursue. I presume that mixed martial arts is off the table, but any discursive opportunity, and I'll have a rap battle with her. We can do something on Twitch. If there's some other creative format that she would prefer, I'm down. I really just want my neighbors to have the opportunity to hear a debate instead of having the wool pulled over our eyes for as long. And so if you have any clever ideas there or want to host that forum, holler at me. I'll be very eager to participate.
Don't vote for Shahid. He's not a winner. I'm the queen of every donor dinner. All right, now it's you. You're on. What do you got? That was hers.
That was great. Well, what we see in our society.
You got to drop something.
I'm on it right now, homie. Give me a beatbox. I'll match the rhythm. What we see in our society, from the Pelosi's to the Kennedys, is one family after another abusing the public and our democracy.
Boom. There it is.
Off the dome.
Nice. Love it, buddy. Everyone, check it out at Shahid for Change. And what was the website one more time? Throw it at everybody.
Yeah, shahidforchange.us or Shahid. That's a shorter URL.
Right on. Buddy, always great to catch up with you. Excited about the projects that are on the horizon. Let's go over to the chat for a hot minute before we sign out here. Red Pill, what's up, buddy? Love, peace, freedom, happiness, wishes to you. Thank you so much, Red Pill. Thank you very much for that. Jason, what's up, buddy? I hope you're doing well, Jason. The U.S. spent $199 billion in Iraq for quote unquote infrastructure rebuilding. I feel you there. Thank you very much for that, Red Pill. Thank you very much, Jason. We'll be back tomorrow. Check Shahid out in the meantime, shahidforchange.us. Look out for that album and book. And we're going to have you back on to talk about them because I'm going to check them both out.
I look forward to it. Always good to be with you, brother. Keep up the great work.
All right. We'll be back tomorrow, and y'all know the drill. In the meantime, Lucy, she says meow, and we say peace. Peace.
Peace, brother.